There's a certain delicious freedom that comes with widowhood after a long and happy marriage. Don't misunderstand me. I adored my husband, Arthur. He was the great love of my life, a brilliant, roaring lion of a man who built a formidable empire and gave me a life of breathtaking adventure. His absence is a continent of loss I navigate every day. But now, in the quiet, sunlit years that have followed his passing, I have discovered a different kind of joy. A quieter, more mischievous kind. It's the joy of being thoroughly, completely, and utterly underestimated. The world looks at a 70-year-old woman with silver hair and a string of pearls and sees a gentle, slightly fragile grandmother, a relic from a bygone era. They don't see the woman who, in 1978, sat across from a table of stony-faced oil sheikhs in Dubai and, speaking flawless Arabic, negotiated a deal that quadrupled our company's value. They don't see the woman who could spot the tail of a corporate raider in the flick of an eye from across a ballroom. They see a lovely old dear, someone to be placated with tea and polite conversation. And that, my dears, is a tactical advantage I have come to thoroughly, deeply enjoy. If you are listening to this, perhaps from your own gilded cage or comfortable armchair, please consider subscribing. This isn't a story about loss or about the indignities of aging. It's a story about the profound, often hilarious, miscalculations people make when they confuse a quiet life with a weak one. It's a story about my daughter-in-law, Chloe, and the day she decided to commit grand larceny, not realizing she was trying to rob a bank whose board of directors I chaired for 20 years. The discovery itself was almost insultingly mundane. It happened on a Tuesday morning, a day like any other. I was sitting at my antique French escritoire, a delicate porcelain cup of Darjeeling tea steaming at my elbow. The morning sun was streaming through the bay windows of my study, illuminating the rich tapestry of my life, the shelves of leather-bound books, the small Monet Arthur had bought me for our 10th anniversary, the scent of old paper and beeswax. I was preparing to make my quarterly donation to the city's animal shelter. It's a silly little ritual of mine, a way of honoring Arthur, who firmly believed that dogs were morally superior to most board members he knew. I opened my private banking app on my tablet, the one with the ludicrously complex, multi-layered security protocols that Arthur himself had designed. I entered the familiar password, a sequence based on the date of a particularly disastrous but hilarious sailing trip we took in the Greek Isles. I waited for the balance to appear, and when it did, I blinked. Then I blinked again. I took off my reading glasses, polished them with a silk cloth, and put them back on. The number remained the same. $500,000. Gone. Not transferred, not invested. Simply gone. Vanished into the digital ether with no trace, no memo, no authorization code. There was no jolt of panic, no frantic gasp, not even a quickening of my pulse. Just a slow, cold, and utterly clarifying calm that settled over me like a winter frost. I am not a careless woman. My financial affairs are managed with the precision of a military campaign. A sum of that magnitude does not simply disappear by accident. It is moved, it is taken, it is stolen. And in my small, carefully curated world, there was only one person with the access, the audacity, and the uniquely desperate brand of avarice to perform such a clumsy, blatant heist. My son's wife, Chloe. Chloe is a woman who wears her ambition like a designer handbag, expensive, conspicuous, and ultimately, a little bit empty. She married my son, Robert, not for love, but for a ladder. She saw the sterling name as a shortcut to the social stratosphere she so desperately wanted to inhabit. She is beautiful, I'll give her that. But it is the cold, flawless beauty of a marble statue in a museum, something to be admired from a distance, but which offers no warmth. She has always resented me. I used to think it was because she found me old-fashioned, but I've since realized it's something far more primal. She resents me not for anything I've done, but for what I represent. I am old money, old grace, old power. My name opens doors that her new money can only knock on. I am a living reminder that the things she chases, the fleeting trends, the validation from likes on social media, the envy of lesser women, are ultimately tiresome. She sees my quiet confidence not as a strength, but as a silent, infuriating judgment on her own frantic, noisy efforts. My son, my dear Robert, is a good man with a weak spine. He loves me, I know he does, in his own way. But he is utterly intoxicated by Chloe's glamour, terrified of her disapproval. He sees her relentless ambition as strength and my quiet contentment as a form of surrender. He has allowed her to slowly, methodically, push me to the periphery of our family, and has convinced himself it is for my own good to not burden me with their fast-paced life. I closed the banking app. I did not call the police. I did not call my lawyer. Not yet. A declaration of war should never be made rashly. Wars are won not with the first shot, but with the final, perfectly executed maneuver. First, one must gather intelligence from the field. I stood up, walked to my wardrobe, and selected a simple but impeccably tailored Chanel luncheon dress. I had a daughter-in-law to visit. I found them at their ridiculously oversized minimalist house, a place with more glass and concrete than warmth, a house designed for magazines, not for living. Just as I suspected, Chloe was in the middle of a photo shoot for some online magazine, posing in her stark white living room. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, her expression a practiced pout of bored elegance. Robert was hovering in the background, looking vaguely uncomfortable, a familiar role for him. "Margaret," Chloe said, her voice a symphony of false surprise as she broke her pose, though her eyes were cold. "What a lovely surprise! I didn't know you were coming." The unspoken end of that sentence was, "And I certainly didn't invite you." "I was just in the neighborhood, dear," I lied smoothly, giving her the warm, grandmotherly smile she so despised. "I won't be a moment. Robert, darling, could you help me with something in the study? A little issue with my tablet." I led my son away from the flurry of the photo shoot into the sterile silence of his home office. I closed the door, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud. "Is everything all right, Mom?" he asked, his brow furrowed with that familiar, anxious concern that was his default state. "Everything is perfect," I said, my smile never wavering. "I just seem to have misplaced a rather large sum of money, $500,000 to be exact. It seems to have vanished from my main account. It's the strangest thing. I was just wondering, has Chloe mentioned making any significant purchases recently? Perhaps a new charity initiative or a sudden impulsive art acquisition?" I watched his face. It was like watching a pane of glass crack in slow motion. I saw it all. The initial flash of raw panic, the flicker of guilt so profound it was almost a confession. And then, the walls coming up, the frantic, desperate search for a plausible denial. He couldn't meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, at the ceiling, at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "500,000? He stammered, his attempt at shock so unconvincing it was almost comical. No, of course not. Chloe, she would never. It must be a bank error, Mom. A glitch in the system. You know how unreliable that technology can be for your generation. You should call them." He was a terrible liar, but more than that, he was a willing accomplice. In his silence, in his refusal to even consider the possibility, in his immediate, clumsy attempt to blame my age and my supposed incompetence with technology, he had chosen his side. He had chosen his wife over his mother, and that, more than the stolen money, was the true, unforgivable betrayal. I just patted his arm gently, my touch light, my smile still in place. "You're right, dear. It must be a bank error. I'm sure it will sort itself out." I turned and left the study, leaving him there with his weak denials and his shared guilt. My heart ached, not for the money, but for the son I had just lost. But this was not a time for grief. This was a time for strategy. I had confirmed the enemy's position. I had seen their defenses. Now, it was time to plan the counterattack. A direct accusation is a clumsy weapon. It's loud, it's messy, and it gives your opponent the moral high ground of the wrongly accused. A truly elegant strategy does not rely on confrontation, but on confirmation. My goal was not to make Chloe confess. It was to make her expose herself, to become so comfortable in her perceived victory that she would carelessly reveal the true, ugly nature of her character. And for that, I needed the perfect setting. 3 days later, I called her. Not Robert, but Chloe directly. Her phone rang several times before she answered, her voice clipped and impatient. "Margaret, is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful, my dear," I said, my voice warm and cheerful. "In fact, I'm calling to invite you and Robert to a little celebratory lunch. Just the three of us. My treat. Shall we say, the Grand Terrace at 1 o'clock on Friday?" There was a stunned silence on the other end. The Grand Terrace was not just a restaurant, it was a statement. It was the most exclusive, most sought-after lunch spot in the city. A place where reservations were a myth and entry was granted based on the weight of your last name. It was, of course, Chloe's absolute favorite. It was a place she often complained I didn't take her to enough. "The Grand Terrace?" she finally managed, her voice a mix of suspicion and poorly concealed excitement. "But what are we celebrating?" "Oh, just a little financial windfall," I said breezily. "You know that bank error I mentioned to Robert? It seems they found my missing money. A silly computer glitch, just as he thought. And as an apology for the distress, the bank manager gave me a rather generous gift certificate. I thought, who better to share it with than my two favorite people?" It was a lie, of course. A beautiful, perfectly constructed lie. There was no gift certificate. The money was still very much gone. But I knew Chloe's greed would be a far more powerful motivator than her suspicion. The prospect of a free lunch at the city's most exclusive restaurant was a bait she simply could not resist. "Well, in that case," she said, her voice suddenly much warmer, "we would be delighted. Friday at 1. We'll be there." I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early. The maitre d', a distinguished man named Antoine, whom I had known for 20 years, greeted me with a warm, genuine smile. "Mrs. Sterling, a pleasure as always. Your usual table is ready." My usual table was the best in the house, a quiet corner booth with a panoramic view of the city. As I settled in, I saw Chloe and Robert arrive. Chloe swept into the room with the air of a visiting monarch, her eyes scanning the crowd for important faces. She was wearing a new, ridiculously expensive-looking dress, a purchase, no doubt, funded by my life savings. Robert followed in her wake, looking, as ever, like a handsome but anxious accessory. "Mother!" Chloe exclaimed, kissing the air beside my cheek. "This is just divine. I'd almost forgotten how lovely this place is." "Some things are timeless," I replied with a gentle smile, my eyes meeting hers. The lunch was a masterclass in passive aggression. Chloe dominated the conversation, talking loudly about her new dress, about a charity gala she was planning, about all the wonderful, expensive things she was going to do. It was a performance, a way of rubbing her newfound wealth in my face without ever mentioning it directly. She was waving my own money in front of me like a matador's cape. I just listened, smiling, nodding, playing the part of the slightly doting, slightly clueless mother-in-law. I asked about her charity work. I complimented her dress. I created an atmosphere of such warm, benign acceptance that she began to relax. Her guard came down. The thrill of getting away with her crime, combined with the expensive champagne she was ordering, made her bold. It was over dessert that she finally made her move. "You know, Margaret," she began, leaning forward with a conspiratorial air, "I'm so glad you're being sensible about this." "Sensible about what, dear?" I asked, taking a delicate bite of my crème brûlée. "About the money," she said, her voice dropping to a low, intimate whisper. "That bank error. It's for the best, really, let's be honest. What would a woman in your position do with $500,000 anyway? Your needs are simple. You don't travel. You don't entertain. It was just sitting there, collecting dust, stagnating." I just looked at her, my smile unwavering. "And you feel you can put it to better use?" "Exactly," she said, relieved that I seemed to understand. "I see it as liberating it, putting it back into the economy. Think of the jobs I'm creating by buying this dress. Think of the caterers I'll employ for my gala. In a way, I'm doing a public service. And besides," she added, her eyes turning cold for just a moment, "it's a safety net. For Robert, for our future. You wouldn't want your son's future to be insecure, would you?" It was a threat, wrapped in the language of concern. She was telling me that she held my son's happiness hostage, and my money was the ransom. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. I put down my spoon, dabbed my lips with my napkin, and looked her directly in the eye. My smile remained, but it was no longer warm. It was something else entirely, something she couldn't quite read. "My dear Chloe," I said, my voice as smooth as the cream on her dessert, "you are absolutely right. The money is in much better hands now. You should enjoy every last penny of it, truly." Her face fell. This was not the reaction she had expected. She had wanted me to be angry, or sad, or defeated. She had wanted a fight, or a surrender. She had not expected cheerful, absolute agreement. My quiet, smiling acceptance was more unnerving to her than any accusation could ever have been. It was a move in a game she didn't even know we were playing. She stared at me, a flicker of genuine confusion and, for the first time, a tiny sliver of fear in her eyes. She had won the battle, stolen the prize, and yet she had the distinct, unsettling feeling that she had just walked straight into a trap. I just smiled, raised my glass of water in a silent toast and said, "To the future." Chloe believed she had delivered a killing blow. She thought that by stealing my money, she had stolen my power, my independence, my very essence. She expected me to retreat, to wither, to become the fragile, dependent old woman she had always wanted me to be. It is a common mistake the greedy make. They believe that money is the only source of power because it is the only source of power they themselves understand. So, I decided to give her a masterclass in the currencies that truly matter: influence, grace, and joy. My revenge would not be a bitter, shouted affair. It would be a symphony, played out on the grand stage of the city's high society, and every joyful note would be another thorn in her side. My revenge was simply this: I was going to live the most glorious, fabulous, and visible life imaginable. My counteroffensive began not with a phone call to a lawyer, but with a phone call to my hairdresser. I shed the sensible, understated style I had maintained for years and emerged with a chic, silver haircut that was both modern and timeless. Then, I went shopping. I didn't replace the money Chloe had stolen. I didn't need to. Arthur had left me with resources she couldn't even fathom. I simply decided it was time to stop living modestly. I bought gowns from designers whose names Chloe only whispered with reverence. I bought jewels that made my old pearls look like children's toys. And then, I re-entered the world. For years, I had politely declined most social invitations, preferring the quiet company of my books and memories. Now, I accepted everything. The opera galas, the charity auctions, the museum openings. And I did not just attend. I made an entrance. I would arrive, dressed in something spectacular, and the room would quiet for a moment. People were not used to seeing Margaret Sterling, the quiet widow, looking like a silver screen goddess. Old friends, powerful figures in the city's landscape, bank presidents, newspaper publishers, art moguls flocked to my side, delighted to see me emerge from my self-imposed exile. "Margaret, you look breathtaking," they'd exclaim. "We've missed you." I would just smile and say, I decided it was time to start enjoying the third act. Chloe and Robert were, of course, at these same events, and they were forced to watch my renaissance from the sidelines. I made a point of never approaching them first. I would let them see me across the room, holding court, laughing with a senator, or sharing a quiet word with the city's most powerful real estate developer. I would watch the confusion and then the burning, impotent fury grow in Chloe's eyes. This was not part of her plan. I was supposed to be at home, crying into my tea, not becoming the most talked-about woman in the city. The true masterstroke, however, was the Sterling Foundation's annual charity ball. It was our family's foundation, an institution I had built with Arthur from the ground up, dedicated to funding arts education for underprivileged children. Traditionally, it was the one event I always chaired. After Arthur's death, Chloe had made a concerted effort to sideline me, filling the board with her own vapid, social climbing friends. This year, she was the chairwoman. She had planned the entire event, determined to make it her crowning social achievement. She sent me an invitation, of course a perfunctory obligation. She probably expected me to sit quietly at a back table. I arrived wearing a custom-made gown of emerald green velvet that seemed to drink the light. On my ears, I wore a pair of magnificent emerald earrings, a gift from a Maharaja. Arthur and I had once advised, earrings that Chloe had coveted for years. I didn't just attend her party, I became the sun around which her party orbited. The theme of the auction that night was legacy. Chloe, in her opening speech, spoke eloquently about the importance of building a legacy for the future. She did not mention Arthur's name once. I just smiled from my table. The guest of honor that evening was a reclusive, world-famous artist, a man who had not made a public appearance in over a decade. Securing his attendance was Chloe's great coup. When he took the stage to receive his award, he began his speech with a story. 30 years ago, the famous artist said, his voice raspy with emotion, I was a penniless, unknown painter. My work was dark, and no one wanted it. I was about to give up. Then, a woman saw one of my paintings in a dusty little gallery. She bought it. But more than that, she sought me out. She told me that she saw not darkness in my work, but a profound understanding of the human heart. She and her husband gave me a grant from their new foundation. It was enough to live on for a year. That grant, and her belief in me, changed my life. That woman is here tonight. He scanned the crowd, and his eyes landed on me. He smiled. Margaret Sterling, he said. That grant was the first check the Sterling Foundation ever wrote. You were my first believer. This award is not for me. It is for you. The entire ballroom turned to look at me. The applause was deafening. I saw Chloe on the stage, her face frozen in a mask of horrified disbelief. In a single story, the artist had effortlessly reminded the entire city of who the true heart of the Sterling legacy was. He had reduced Chloe's entire evening to a footnote in my own story. I simply stood, gave a gracious nod to the artist and the applauding crowd, and sat back down. I didn't need to make a speech. My presence, my history, was speech enough. Later that evening, Chloe cornered me near the terrace. The charming hostess was gone, replaced by a woman consumed by a rage she could no longer conceal. What was that? She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. You planned that. You did that to humiliate me. I took a slow sip of my champagne. My dear Chloe, I said, my voice filled with a calm, almost gentle amusement. Some people think that money can break a person. They forget that for some of us, our spirit is the one asset you can never steal. I left her there, sputtering, as I was swept away by a group of old friends. The battle was not yet over. But I had won the psychological war. I had shown her that the money she had stolen was nothing more than petty cash. I had shown her that my true fortune, my relationships, my history, my joy, was something she could never, ever touch. And the final act of my radiant revenge was yet to come. The next 2 months were a blur of glittering social events. I became a fixture in the city's society pages, my name always accompanied by photographs of me laughing, radiant, surrounded by influential friends. My life, from the outside, looked like a non-stop celebration. Chloe and Robert were forced to watch from the sidelines, their own social standing paradoxically diminishing as mine grew. My joyful, vibrant presence served as a constant, unspoken rebuke to their dark little secret. Chloe's plan to break my spirit had backfired in the most spectacular way. She had inadvertently unleashed a more powerful, more visible, and more beloved version of me than had existed in years. I saw the toll it was taking on her. Her smiles at parties became brittle, her laughter a little too loud. She had the money, yes, but she had none of the joy. She was a woman sitting on a pile of stolen treasure, dying of thirst. Robert, in turn, looked increasingly haunted, caught between his wife's growing desperation and the silent, smiling judgment of his mother. They had the cash, but I had the capital, the social and emotional capital that truly ran the city. But my radiant revenge was only one part of the strategy. It was the public face, the beautiful, dazzling distraction. The true, final blow would not be delivered in a crowded ballroom, but in the hushed, wood-paneled silence of a lawyer's office. While the world saw Margaret Sterling, the social butterfly, there was another Margaret at work, the one who had sat beside Arthur for 40 years, learning the intricate, merciless game of power and legacy. On a quiet Wednesday morning, while Chloe was likely agonizing over which charity luncheon to be seen at, I had a different kind of appointment. I didn't take my usual car. I took a simple town car to a discreet, old stone building downtown, a building that housed the offices of Davies, Finch, and Associates, the most powerful and discreet estate lawyers in the state. Mr. Davies's office was a sanctuary of old-world power. The air smelled of aged leather, lemon polish, and the quiet, unshakable authority of generational wealth. Mr. Davies's office was a sanctuary of 9. Davies himself was a man who seemed carved from the same mahogany as his desk. He was in his late 70s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen the rise and fall of family dynasties. He had been my husband's lawyer, his confidant, and his friend. He was a man who understood the concept of a legacy better than anyone. He greeted me not with pity, but with a deep, knowing respect. "Margaret," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You look well, positively glowing, in fact." "I've found a new lease on life, Edward," I replied, taking the seat opposite him. "It's amazing what a little decluttering can do for the spirit." He allowed himself a small, dry smile. He knew, of course. I had informed him of the unauthorized withdrawal from my account weeks ago, with the strict instruction that he was to take no action. He was a patient man, a master of the long game. "I have reviewed the documents as you requested," he said, getting straight to business. He gestured to a thick, leather-bound folder on his desk. "Arthur's will is, as you know, quite clear. Upon your passing, the entirety of the Sterling estate, including all properties, assets, and the controlling interest in the Sterling Foundation, is to be passed down to your son, Robert, and his family." I nodded slowly. That was our plan, to build something that would last for generations. A legacy for our son and his children and their children. I looked out the large window at the city my husband and I had helped to build. But a legacy, Edward, is more than just money and buildings. It's a set of values, and when those values are betrayed, the legacy itself is broken. Mr. Davies listened, his expression impassive, his hands steepled before him. He knew this was more than a legal meeting, it was a verdict. "My daughter-in-law," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion, "believes that money is the only thing of value in this world. She stole a significant sum from me to prove that point, to prove that without it, I would be diminished." My son, in his silence, endorsed her philosophy. I turned my gaze back to him. "They have shown me what they value. Now, I will show them what I value." I leaned forward. "I want to change the will. Everything." Mr. Davies did not seem surprised. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. "The entirety of the estate is yours, Margaret, to do with as you see fit. What are your instructions?" This was the moment. The quiet, solitary execution of a plan that had been forming in my mind for weeks. It was a move born not of anger, but of a profound and painful clarity. "I want to leave Robert and Chloe a single symbolic bequest," I said. $1, and the family photograph album, so they can remember the family they chose to betray. I continued, my voice steady and clear. "The remainder, all of it, Edward, the houses, the stock portfolio, the art collection, the controlling shares of the foundation, every last penny. I want it to be placed in a new, irrevocable trust." "A trust for whom?" he asked, picking up his fountain pen. "Not for a person," I said. "I want to establish the Arthur Sterling Grant for Young Artists. The foundation will continue its work, but the entirety of my personal estate will be used to fund a new, massive grant, given annually to one brilliant, struggling young artist. The kind of artist Arthur and I used to support when we had nothing but a dream. It will be the largest private arts grant in the country. It will change a life, every single year, forever." I sat back, the words hanging in the silent, sunlit office. It was a perfect plan. It was not a destruction, it was a repurposing. I was taking the wealth they coveted and transforming it into something they could never understand, a legacy of hope, of creativity, of genuine philanthropy. I was taking the inheritance they believed was their birthright and giving it back to the world. Mr. Davies wrote for a few moments, his pen scratching quietly on the thick, legal paper. He finally looked up, his sharp eyes meeting mine. "It is a magnificent gesture, Margaret. Arthur would be immensely proud." He paused. "And, If I may say so, it is also the most devastatingly effective act of disinheritance I have ever witnessed. I have no interest in punishing them, Edward, I said, and I meant it. I am simply reallocating my assets to a place where they will be better appreciated. He nodded, a look of deep admiration on his face. I will have the new documents drafted immediately. We will need a final signing to execute the new will. Of course, I said, standing up. Schedule it for the day after the Sterling Foundation charity ball. I believe that would be the most appropriate time. As I walked out of the quiet, mahogany-paneled office and back into the bustling city, I felt a profound sense of peace. The public, radiant revenge was fun, a delightful game of social chess. But this quiet execution in the heart of the city's legal fortress, this was real. This was permanent. Chloe had stolen $500,000 from me, and with the stroke of a pen, I had just taken back an empire. The night of the Sterling Foundation charity ball arrived, a glittering jewel in the city's social crown. It was the one event I had not created, the one stage I had not built. This was Chloe's territory, the culmination of her year-long effort to cement her place as a philanthropic powerhouse. I knew she and Robert would be there, forced to smile and play their parts, even as my recent social renaissance had thoroughly eclipsed them. My attendance was not just expected, it was the main event. Everyone was waiting to see what Margaret Sterling would do next. I chose my gown with the precision of a general choosing her armor for a final, decisive battle. It was a couture piece of shimmering, silver silk, a color that perfectly complemented my hair. Around my neck, I wore a single, magnificent diamond necklace, the legendary sterling diamond, a piece Arthur had given me on our 30th anniversary, a piece I had not worn in public for over a decade. Its appearance alone was a statement, a declaration that the true matriarch of the Sterling family was present and accounted for. When I entered the grand ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd, followed by a ripple of whispers. I saw Chloe and Robert standing near the stage. Chloe was wearing a dramatic, blood-red gown, but my entrance had completely stolen her thunder. I saw her eyes fix on the sterling diamond, and her face tightened with a flash of pure, unadulterated envy. She saw a jewel. She did not see the 30 years of love it represented. Robert simply looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I spent the first part of the evening gliding through the crowd, a serene smile on my face, accepting compliments, and exchanging pleasantries. I was the gracious queen in her court. I did not approach my son or his wife. I let them watch from a distance as the world they so desperately wanted to conquer paid homage to me. The highlight of the evening was the presentation of the Sterling Legacy Award, given to a figure who had made a significant contribution to the city's culture. This year, the recipient was me. It was an old honor, one that Chloe had likely been unable to redirect without causing a scandal. She was forced to be the one to present it. She walked to the podium, her smile as brittle as spun glass. She read from a teleprompter, her voice flat and robotic, listing my decades of quiet philanthropy, my contributions to the museum, my support for the city ballet. With every word, she was forced to publicly acknowledge the very substance she had tried to deny I possessed. It was a perfect, exquisite torture. When she finished, she handed me the heavy crystal award and stepped back, her duty done. The applause was long and warm. I stepped to the microphone, the brilliant stage lights warm on my face. The entire room was silent, waiting. Chloe and Robert stood just to the side of the stage, trapped, forced to listen to the speech of the woman they had betrayed. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating through the grand ballroom. "Thank you, Chloe, for that lovely introduction. And thank you to the foundation for this beautiful honor. When my dear Arthur and I started this foundation, we did it with a simple belief, that a legacy is not what you own, it's what you give away." I saw Chloe flinch at the mention of Arthur's name. "For the past few months," I continued, "I have been doing a great deal of thinking about that word. Legacy. What does it mean to leave something behind? Do we leave behind buildings? Bank accounts? Or do we leave behind opportunities? Do we leave behind a better, kinder, more beautiful world for those who come after us?" I let the questions hang in the air, I could see the confusion on the faces in the crowd. This was not the standard polite thank you speech they were expecting. "My son and his wife," I said, my gaze sweeping over them for a brief, powerful moment, "have recently reminded me of the importance of financial security. They have shown me that for some, the accumulation of wealth is the ultimate goal, the very measure of a life well lived." Robert went pale. Chloe's eyes darted around the room, a cornered animal searching for an escape. "And their lesson," I said, "was well taken. I have come to realize that my own legacy, the one Arthur and I intended to pass down, was perhaps too vulnerable, too dependent on the hope that future generations would share our values. So, I have decided to make a change, to secure that legacy in a way that can never be misunderstood, never be squandered, and never be betrayed." I paused, looking out at the sea of expectant faces. This was the moment. The quiet execution was about to get its public announcement. "To that end," I declared, my voice ringing with a new, joyful power, "I am announcing tonight the formation of a new, irrevocable trust. Effective tomorrow morning, my entire personal estate, every stock, every bond, every property, every piece of art, every dollar will be transferred to this trust." A gasp went through the room. I looked at Chloe. Her face was a mask of utter frozen horror. The $500,000 she had stolen was a pittance, a drop in the ocean of the inheritance she had just seen evaporate before her very eyes. "This trust," I continued, my smile now wide and radiant, the smile of the woman in the photograph, "will fund the Arthur Sterling Grant for Young Artists, the largest private arts grant in the country. It will change a life every single year, in perpetuity. That will be our true legacy." I then turned my gaze one last time to my son and his wife. They were both staring at me, their faces shattered. They had played a small, grubby game for a handful of cash. I had been playing a much larger game for the soul of my family's name, and I had won. "I believe," I concluded, my voice softening, "that the best inheritance is not something we leave to our children, but something we build for our community. Thank you all." As the ballroom erupted in a wave of stunned, then thunderous applause, I walked off the stage. I did not look back at the wreckage I had left behind. Chloe had tried to steal my savings. In response, I had given away an empire, and in doing so, I had never felt richer. She had tried to break my spirit, and instead, she had given me a purpose. Some lessons, I mused, come with a very, very high price. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your own story in the comments. Your voice, believe me, always matters.